Now I'm going to introduce the board president for the Boulder County Bar Association, Jeffrey Rose.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Thank you to everybody for attending. Today's topic is a topic that's been very important to the Bar Association from its outset. The topic is on equal protection under the law and racial inequality. This isn't something that's new on people's radar. It's something that's been impacting us for generations, but it's something that certainly came into the forefront of everyone's mind in the past couple of years. When we started this year for the bar board, one of the things that we were talking about doing was trying to put together a meaningful panel or a meaningful discussion on these topics and how they relate to what's going on in Boulder County. Our fantasy at that time was, what if we could get Sheriff Joe Pelle and District Attorney Michael Dougherty on the same panel together? I mean, you think they would even do it? Well, as a testament to who they are and how they view their role in our community, wasn't just a yes, it was an of course that we got from both of them. And we are so thankful for them to be here today. Sheriff Joe Pelle is someone that I imagine everybody on this sidebar presentation knows and has met in person over the years. He is true Boulder County, graduated from Fairview High in 1977, undergraduate degree in criminal justice from Metro State, graduate degree from CU in criminal justice as well. He's been a law enforcement officer in Boulder County since 1980. With us today also is District Attorney Michael Dougherty, an equally impressive career. He has been at the Colorado Attorney General's office from 2010 to 2018, where he was in the criminal justice unit and was, I believe, the deputy district or the deputy attorney general in the criminal justice division. Of course, he was elected as our Boulder County district attorney in the general election in 2018 and has served in that role since. Mr. Dougherty has also been an adjunct professor of law at Fordham University, where he taught constitutional law and criminal procedure. It is our great honor that you both are willing to spend your time with us this afternoon, and I would venture that today's presentation is probably going to be our most watched and especially our most replayed and streamed presentation of the sidebar this year. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Laura and Kyle for organizing this. We present to you our membership, Sheriff Joe Pelle and District Attorney Michael Dougherty. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey. No pressure here. We're glad to be here. This has been a hot button year, and we've been involved in sometimes over our heads in racial equity issues, Senate bills, legislative fixes, training, data collection. The effort is massive and ongoing, and there's a tremendous amount going on right now. Michael, do you want to take some introductory statements or open it up?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Jeffrey, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Sheriff Pelle and I are honored to be with you today and talk to you about some of the current events. And it's obviously a very long list. And when Sheriff Pelle and I got together to talk about this presentation, there was no shortage of topics for us to talk about with you today, but we'd love to also have your input and your questions. So if you use the chat box, that'd be really terrific. We encourage you to do so. Many of you, I recognize your names on the screen, and you've been around Boulder County and in the justice system for quite some time. So I know you're very familiar with the justice system here in Boulder County, and we'll be talking today about some of the more recent events and some of the new programs that have been developed at the jail and the district attorney's office, as well as here in the court system, and talking about some of our hopes and plans for the months ahead. Currently, we're still working our way through the pandemic, and I personally and professionally am really excited because I do see a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm very hopeful for that as we move forward. We thought it'd be good to start off by updating you on where we are with the arrest standards or the limitations on the jail population that Sheriff Pelle put in place right at the start of the pandemic. As you will recall, Boulder County moved very quickly to take steps to mitigate the possibility of the virus spreading like a wildfire through the jail population for a number of reasons that I'm sure are obvious to everyone on this call, but we recognize that as a priority. So here at the District Attorney's Office, we took steps to reduce the jail population in mid-March of last year. And it's really hard to believe a year has gone by. And then Sheriff Pelle and his staff instituted restrictions on what offenses could be booked into the jail. And as a result of all those efforts, the jail population has been kept far below what it was normally prior to the pandemic. So I'd love for Sheriff Pelle to update you on where the jail is at in terms of limitations, and then talk to you a little bit about what that might look like going forward and some of the things we've been weighing and hearing back from on the community and also from law enforcement.
Yeah, so we worked with the Department of Public Health and instituted a plan to cohort intakes, to keep jail intakes into small groups of no more than 14 people, and keep them in that group with the same staff and the same inmates for a period of several days so that they could be tested and clear a hurdle of quarantine before they're moved into the general population in the jail. That's been successful. The biggest outbreak we've had is 12. And so 12 people out of a cohort of 14 tested positive. Some of them got sick. We did have some staff get sick. We had one deputy in ICU for a period of time, but we've managed to keep it from ravaging the jail. We've managed to keep the jail open. And our goal all along has been to make sure the jail is open for people that absolutely need to be incarcerated, and to try to handle low-level offenses, municipal offenses, traffic offenses with, by summonses or other manners. It worked really well for a while. We're starting to get some pushback now from the community. Downtown Boulder, Chamber of Commerce, people are getting concerned with what they view as lawlessness, especially downtown. A lot of people disregarding summonses. There's a lot of people in the community with 12 or 15 FTA warrants for municipal or misdemeanor offenses, and if their property offenses, we're not taking them in the jail right now. I don't think that's sustainable forever. I think we're delaying justice for some people, but I do think we've learned a lot of lessons about how precious that space is, how expensive it is, and how it should only be used when it absolutely needs to be used. And so we've also been working with the ACLU and a number of bill sponsors on a jail depopulation bill that just passed the House. I think it's going to go through the Senate, but it actually puts some of these restrictions in place under statute and makes it statewide.
And Joe, for those that may not be aware, the voters approved a proposal that was very important to you and to me and to the county commissioners for a new facility on the jail campus. Can you share a little bit of information about that facility and where we're at with the construction?
Yeah, we don't have support in this community to build a bigger jail, but we have a burgeoning population of people with criminal justice involvement. They all don't need to be in a hard jail bed. And so we focused on an alternative sentence facility, one that it incorporates kind of open architecture, more property or more programming for people with substance abuse and life skills issues. We had previously contracted for a lot of that through private providers. We had a facility in Longmont. We had one in Boulder. We're combining all those efforts under one roof, building a large alternative sentence facility on the jail campus. It's going to house community corrections. It's going to house alternative sentencing, work release, inmate workers in the community, day reporting. And instead of being privately run by for-profit corporations, it's going to be run by the county, and county employees from community justice services are going to be doing programming. They're providing group programming as well as individual case management. The voters approved this by a margin of 75%. It passed. It's a 5-year sales tax. We're collecting the money now. Planning's underway. Architect's been hired. The site plan is about, the site review plan is in progress. That can take a year and a half. But we're hoping to start construction on that facility in the next year or two, and to see it up and running in the next 3 or 4 years.
What do you think will be some of the expanded services for individuals who are in the jail?
Well, so currently we're running a work release program out of the jail, as well as community workers. We're going to move all those people that don't need to be in a hard jail bed cell, we're going to move them all into this new facility that's going to be more dormitory style. And again, we're going to be providing services, counseling, group therapy sessions, life skills training, that kind of thing we're going to be providing in this setting that they're not currently provided, or they're not currently provided at a very high level by the private contractors the county uses. So I'm hoping for better outcomes as far as recidivism and helping people with, their alcohol issue or their pain pill issue, that kind of thing. I think we can extend a lot more service and a lot more help under this setting.
Definitely. I'm just looking to see if anybody has questions about the limitations on the jail population currently or the alternative sensing facility. I don't see any in the chat box. We did want to share with you an update on the mental health diversion program. As you may recall, Sheriff Pelle and others worked on a pilot project for mental health diversion programs at 4 pilot sites throughout the state. Boulder County was chosen as one of those pilot sites, and we're really excited to kick off the project. Initially, it was funded by the state. However, when the fiscal crisis created by the pandemic, or anticipated as a result of the pandemic, hit, the state legislature cut all the funding for the mental health diversion programs. Boulder County was one of 4 in the state that had set up a mental health diversion program. Ours was the only one that was pre-file or pre-charging, meaning that when individuals were screened at the jail or at the first appearance center, if they screened as having a significant mental health disorder on a low-level offense, they would immediately be diverted out of the jail without charges being filed and connected with mental health treatment in the community. It's something that Sheriff Pelle and I are both very passionate about. We recognize it's an area where the justice system could do a lot better, and I was so excited that Sheriff Pelle helped lay the foundation for that program being created, and then that we were able to secure it for folks here in Boulder County. I was very distressed, to be candid, by the legislature's decision to cut the funding for the mental health diversion programs. Quite frankly, those kinds of short-term cuts just create long-term damage in the long run. Unfortunately, that's the decision they made because they worried about the budget impact of the coronavirus. Thankfully, here in Boulder County, we've been able to keep the mental health diversion program going by diverting funding from elsewhere within the DA's office and community justice services to keep the mental health diversion program up and running. We've expanded it, and it's now operating at full capacity, maximum capacity. We'd like to expand it further. It's just a question of funding. And we are 100% committed to keeping it going. One example of success from that program that we'll share with you is that we had a gentleman in 2019 who was arrested 100 times. And if you think about the impact he was having on the community, the impact on his life, and the resource drain created by 100 arrests in 365 days, to me, it highlights why this program was created. He was brought into the program in 2020. He's been arrested 1 time since. And to me, that highlights the success of this program and the reason we want to keep it going and, in fact, grow it to have a greater impact in addition to a mental health court. And it's been a focus for us over the past year, even during the pandemic. And I think it's been especially important during the pandemic because we see a gap, of course, for folks who need behavioral health treatment, either substance abuse and or mental health treatment during this pandemic, just because it's harder to connect with providers and harder for people to get together in the same room, obviously. So it's been especially important over the past year, and we're going to keep it going and look forward to expanding in the future. We've asked the legislature to restore the funding. They've said that due to their concern about possible budget cuts, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So we remain the only jurisdiction in the state that currently has a mental health diversion program. We've also been working closely here in Boulder County between law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and treatment providers on co-responder programs. And in a moment, I'm going to kick it over to Sheriff Pelle to talk more about the co-responder model programs we have. We had hoped that the state legislature would increase the amount of grant funding available for co-responder models. We have a number of those in Boulder County. The only thing keeping us from expanding those, based on our conversations with all the police chiefs, the only obstacle we have is funding. So we'd hope that the state legislature would expand the amount of funding that currently exists in a grant program for co-responder models. And unfortunately, that bill did not pass through the legislature. It was in a hearing about 2 weeks ago, and they decided not to move it forward. But we're going to continue working on co-responder models here in Boulder County. I'd love for Sheriff Pelle to talk to you a little bit about how that works and on a practical level, and how the sheriff's office is approaching it currently.
Yeah, so we have a co-responder program for Boulder County, and we partner with the city of Erie, town of Erie, and the city of Lafayette, Superior, some of our other partners, and Boulder County Community Services. And Boulder County Community Services provides the FTEs, or the mental health professionals, who respond to calls with the cops for people who are in crisis, and who are able to, help us de-escalate situations, refer people to services. So far, the successes have been that we've cut down on the number of M1 or 72-hour holds. We've cut down on the number of bookings. We've cut down on the number of emergency department visits. And these professionals who are working in the field, responding with the deputies or the police officers, are helping get people to the right place and making warm handoffs and making sure that services are provided without involving the justice system or the hospital system. Unfortunately, Michael, I found out this morning that funding is being cut. Dole is cutting all that funding. So we are now in a mad scramble to figure out how we're going to keep the program alive in the county. And I'm trying to organize the Louisville, Lafayette, Erie's, Boulder County folks to come together and figure out a way to fund this together, because it's an important program to keep going.
And I will say, in the interest of candor, but also in seeking the support of the individuals on this call, I have great respect for the legislators and the challenges they face. But if I could estimate how many times I've been asked about co-responders out in the community, working hand in hand with law enforcement to respond to individuals who are suffering from a mental health crisis, as opposed to a police-only response. I mean, I'd say I've probably been asked about that hundreds of times over the past year, given current events. And also our commitment to restorative justice and diversion, which we'll talk more about in a couple of moments. We're asked about that all the time. And if the legislature wants to see true, meaningful, and lasting criminal justice reform, cutting the funding for all these programs is the absolute wrong direction. And we'll continue to sound that alarm, because these cuts are really unfortunate. So to Sharon's question about, will any of the federal funding for local and state governments be available for this work? If you're referring to CARES Act funding, we have secured CARES Act funding. The challenge with CARES Act funding is it's very temporary. We would not be able to sustain a program necessarily. So we have CARES Act funding, for example, for a court reporter replacement, because the state judicial cut the court reporters from the courthouse here in Boulder County. So we've been able to secure funding for court reporters for the most serious of cases. We've also hired a reentry coordinator, which has been a long-term goal of ours here at the district attorney's office, to help people make a more successful transition to the community when they're coming back from jail or prison. I think we're the only DA's office in the state to have a reentry coordinator. That position was granted for 1 year. So there is federal funding available right now. We're trying to put that to good use, but I don't see it being able to sustain a long-term program such as a mental health diversion program or co-responder model. Joe, if I could ask you a question that Barb Snow put in the chat. She asked, if she's understanding you correctly, the focus on arrest and jailing in Boulder will remain limited, even as we get on the other side of this pandemic, with the focus on what sounds to be more restorative-like justice efforts. Why don't you take that first, and then I'll talk about our restorative justice and diversion programs.
Okay. Yeah, so Barb, we had arrest standards in place long before COVID. We have one of the smallest jails per capita in the state, or especially on the Front Range. We incarcerate fewer people than any other county, any other Class 1 county for sure. We got very restrictive with COVID, so much so that I have, some community and police chiefs, and I'm getting some pretty lively feedback concerning our arrest standards right now, and we're trying to work through that. Our goal right now is to keep our jail healthy, not get inmates sick, and not get our staff sick. Weld County at one point had about 500 sick inmates, and they had an inmate die. El Paso County had over 600 sick inmates, and they had a deputy sheriff die. I don't want to be in that position, and so we're being very, very restrictive with who we take in right now. As the pandemic as the conditions get better, and we are actually, now we just became a authorized vaccination site, and we placed our first order for that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is supposed to arrive March 23rd, a couple hundred doses. We will start to be better protected, be healthier inside, and we will be able to open up a little bit on some of those very restrictive things. But we will always be a progressive jail with limits on who we take in, and we're going to focus on, summonsing whenever possible, using restorative justice whenever possible, deferring cases. When I was on the Criminal Justice Commission, I'd been a cop for a long time, and when you pick someone up that's in a mental health crisis, you had two places to go, jail or the emergency room. We wanted to create something where people could be diverted out of both of those systems and getting put into the correct placement, the correct sort of services, and that's why we really focused on diversion. And we'll keep focusing on diversion and alternatives to incarceration.
And the difficult balance between public safety and also making sure that we maintain the health of the individuals incarcerated at the jail staff, medical staff, attorneys, and the community as a whole. It has been an ongoing conversation with the police chiefs and community members about how we strike the right balance. And I just want to publicly acknowledge Sheriff Pelle, who he has a very difficult job generally, but also especially this year. Because if you think about how would you or how would I make those decisions? How do you determine what the right number is? How do you determine how to explain it to the community? How do you set the right balance? It's easy for any one of us to say, especially after the fact, it should have been X or it should have been Y. But I can't thank you enough, Sheriff, for how receptive you've been to these kinds of conversations, and also trying to consider all the important factors in terms of balancing public safety and health. So thank you. We have expanded restorative justice and diversion within the district attorney's office by 350% over the last couple of years. We've created a driver's license diversion program most recently. Obviously, the mental health diversion programs, I already touched on that, but just the overall expansion of restorative justice and diversion within our office to include low-level felonies and more misdemeanors. Stan Garnett deserves the credit for starting this unit. He did a great job helping lead the effort for DAs to start restorative justice and diversion units. I'd love to see those continue statewide. And here in our office, we continue to have a tremendous rate of success with a 92% success rate, meaning that for 92% of the individuals who accept accountability and go into one of our restorative justice and diversion programs, those cases are then dismissed. So they don't carry with them the collateral consequences that make it so hard to get into jobs, housing, or school. So we continue to put a real emphasis on those programs whenever appropriate. We continue to expand them as we can. We're operating in full capacity in many of those programs, and the staff does a terrific job working as hard as they can, including throughout the pandemic. So we've obviously remained open during the pandemic, you know that, given the crowd that we're speaking with today. But they've also been able to continue connecting with people, and we've been diverting as many cases as possible while still meeting, of course, our mission of doing justice and ensuring community safety throughout the pandemic. So restorative justice and diversion continue to remain priorities for us. We're in the process of working on a drug diversion program along with Boulder County Public Health and mental health partners, and that'll be coming out later this year, I anticipate. And we continue to make it a priority for our jurisdiction.
So one of the other major issues besides coronavirus and jail standards this past year has been equity, racial equity. The conversations around defunding the police or the anti-police sort of sentiment has been problematic for us. We've had a lot of people leave. We've had sort of unprecedented early retirements and resignations. People are leaving to get out of policing, and we're not having a lot of luck recruiting. So that continues to be a big issue. However, race and equity, it's time to come to a reckoning in this country around that. And you know, I worked personally with the district attorneys, the FOP, and the bill sponsors on Senate Bill 2217, which is the sort of giant omnibus police reform bill. We've had a lot of these things in place in Boulder and Boulder County for a while, use of body cameras, that kind of thing. This went a long way towards holding peace officers more accountable for their actions, limiting or eliminating the use of qualified immunity. There are problems with the bill. It was so big and it was written and passed so quickly that there are a number of things that we're having trouble understanding. So we are asking for some bill cleanups or fixes. They don't change the intent or the meat and potatoes of the bill. They help define things like what's a contact. You know, contact is a definition that's really important in regard to capturing racial demographic information, and also when we require deputies or police officers to use their body cameras. Yet it's not well defined. So we think the legislature wants to know when our cops are stopping people to interrogate them or frisk them or investigate a crime. We don't think they care about casual contacts in a community. So we just want to fix that, clarify that. We need some better definitions on use of force. You know, a peace officer can have their post-certification stripped for the rest of their life if they abuse force or if they fail to intervene in an excessive amount of force. But it doesn't define what that is. And so I take it to like sort of the worst case scenario. And I think if someone put the handcuffs on too tight, they could be stripped of their peace officer authority for the rest of their life. And I'm not sure that's right either. I think we need to fix some things like that. So there's a number of things out there. I just want to reassure you, the police chiefs and the sheriffs are not trying to undermine the intent of the bill or take away our ability to hold folks accountable. We are trying to clarify some things and get some clarifying amendments.
Joe, we have a question from Sharon in the chat box that she's glad to hear that contact as a definition will be improved. And she's wondering, in your experience, does that include or would that help clarify around HIPAA issues that exist at hospitals? So for example, kid gets hit in the head and is having stitches at the hospital and a police officer stops by as he's leaving or she's leaving the emergency room just to check in and ask what happened. Does the officer then have to be filming that, recording that, noting the demographic data around that. Do you think that'll be cleared up, or do you think that's an issue?
So I think the body camera portion of the bill is pretty good about defining what has to be redacted from any body camera imaging. But right now, anytime we contact anybody, we have to record it. We're hoping that when and if we get to a place where this is better defined, some of the stuff is going to be cleared up. But right now, yeah, if we contact this kid in the hospital, we have to record, make a record of his demographic information, racial, ethnic, gender, etc., and we have to record it on a body camera. Before that body camera video would be released, it would be redacted so that medical information and that kind of thing were not included.
One area where we've heard a lot of feedback from officers, and I think it's a valid concern certainly, is also how they're supposed to determine the demographics of the individuals they're interacting with. You could imagine, of course, that people could be easily offended or misunderstand an officer's intent if the officer starts asking the person for race, gender, ethnicity, and so on. With traffic stops, if someone has a license, it's easier, or criminal history and there's a computer check run, it's easier. But just staying with the example of a kid in a hospital bed, the officer is left in a position where he or she is supposed to perceive and then accurately record that information. And I think that becomes potentially difficult. So that's another area where law enforcement has talked about getting more direction on how they're supposed to go about doing that.
Yeah, one of the examples somebody gave me was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Define for me Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's demographic information. And I guess you can probably Google that and figure it out, but just look at him and tell me his race and ethnicity. That's how difficult this is. So I think there's a couple bills out there that probably have a lot of interest to the bar. There is a pretrial detention reform bill. It's pretty massive. But one of the things it does is it sets a mandatory time limit on first appearances. They all have to occur within 48 hours, which means weekend court, which is a huge change for the courts, the public defender's office, the district attorney's office, us in managing the jail and moving inmates. And I imagine some folks that do criminal defense work. I think this is going to be accomplished virtually. Michael, is that your understanding right now? That's the way this is going to head?
I believe to some extent it'll be done virtually, and I think that should happen. I do think both related to this topic and generally speaking, I am committed to seeing virtual court continue to be an option. So obviously we have to work with the judges and the defense bar on that, but I do believe virtual court should be an option for individuals, whether it be the individual who's charged, the victims, witnesses who want to watch court appearances. I think it's one of the silver linings of the pandemic. We've learned how successful we could be with this technology. I mean, I often feel grateful for the fact that this pandemic didn't hit 20 years ago. Think about how disruptive this pandemic would have been to the court system 20 years ago. I mean, we would not have been able to conduct this kind of meeting or I was in court earlier today and I appeared in person, but everybody else was on screen. That would not have been possible 20 years ago. So I do think those lessons should take us forward and allow for the improvements that the sponsors of the 48-hour bill are looking to institute. I come from a jurisdiction in New York City where by law, every defendant had to be in front of a judge within 24 hours of his or her arrest. But in order to comply with that requirement, we had court open from 8 a.m. to 1 a.m., 365 days a year. And obviously it puts a burden on all the attorneys, defense and prosecution, as well as law enforcement, the sheriff's office, and the judges. So I do think as we look to put in place certain restrictions, such as the 48-hour rule that's contemplated in this legislation, that we need to have the technological support from the legislature to make sure that, especially in the non-metro areas where people are more spread out and there's fewer staff available, that we have people able to meet the 48-hour requirement and have weekend court conducted as necessary.
There's also a bill currently moving through on disclosure of untruthfulness. For those of you who know what the Brady List is, or a Brady List, law enforcement's required to notify the district attorney when one of our peace officers have found to be untruthful in the course of an investigation, filing an affidavit, writing a report, answering questions in an investigation, that kind of thing. It's being handled very differently in every judicial district in Colorado. District attorneys have different standards, police chiefs and sheriffs have different standards. The reports look different. Nothing's being accumulated in one place in regards to records keeping or that kind of thing. So there's a bill going through that actually has the support of the sheriffs and the police chiefs to standardize that and to make that accountability the same statewide. And that information then, of course, becomes available to the defense bar in regards to the credibility of witnesses in your case. I think that bill is not going to have any difficulty passing. Right now, I don't know of any actual resistance to it. Even the FOP, I believe, is neutral on it right now.
Anybody have any questions about any of the legislation we've discussed up to this point?
So the last, I think the main thing that we were asked about was equity, racial equity, training, what we're doing to try to better the situation in our county and our jurisdiction. I'll just start off the discussion this way. I'm an old white guy that grew up in Boulder, Colorado. I never had to consider or worry about the color of my skin when I was being pulled over by a policeman, or when I was applying for a loan for a house, or when I was applying for a job. So I'm only beginning to understand the underlying issues, the meaning of white privilege, the systematic racism that's gone on in our country for so long. And to be quite honest with you, it never affected me, so I hadn't thought about it a lot in my life. But these last couple of years have been eye-opening. And so we're doing things here to try to open those discussions. We have done anti-bias training. We've done implicit bias training. The jury is out on that nationwide as to whether that even works, or maybe even makes things worse. Some of the better stuff we've done has been really good. We engaged in a training called Courageous Conversation. It was wonderful and eye-opening, and we had breakout groups and we got to talk with people, different backgrounds and that kind of things. We also watched a documentary called 19th and then had a facilitated discussion about the history of African Americans in America, and starting from slavery through Jim Crow, the whole bit. And I just think we live in a very white privileged sort of community, and opening eyes and hearts to what's been going on, in different ways in different places in our country. Excuse me, I'm sorry, 13th, Dia, thank you. That's been important and good, and we're searching for ways to continue that. Unfortunately, the gentleman that we had engaged with in Courageous Conversations left that firm, so we're currently searching out some alternatives, but that will continue. The other thing that's changed in our state, and it's been forced on us, and in some ways it's really hard to do, and in other ways it's really necessary, is data collection. We keep continuing to have conversations about, unfair, inappropriate, not proportionate, that kind of thing, except we didn't have the data to back up the conversation. So nobody really knew. It's kind of all anecdotal. So Senate Bill 217 and a whole bunch of the bills we're facing right now all require data collection around race and equity. And we're going to have race and equity data collection in everything we do. Use of force, contacts, arrests, who's in the jail, who are we issuing summonses to, who are we hiring, who are we promoting, what kind of training are we doing? Those kind of questions are going to be facing us for years to come. It's something we have to come to reckon with. We just recently reinvented our hiring process to apply a racial equity tool to it. So we're very aware of it. We've basically just started to dip our toe in this subject. One of the leaders here that's helped us a lot is Dia Lindsay, who's commenting to me right now that I screwed up the name of the documentary. Thank you, Dia. But she's been a leader here in bringing that training to police officers and deputy sheriffs in our county. So thank you, Dia. Anyway, maybe enough on that, Michael.
Well, I certainly agree with what Sheriff Pelle talked about with regards to race and equity. We identified it as a priority for the district attorney's office starting in 2018. And I know some of you attended an event that we held at the Jewish Community Center. It was co-hosted by all of the law enforcement agencies in Boulder County. We have 8 different agencies, as well as the NAACP, Out Boulder, SPAN, Voices for Children, and other community groups. And I thought it was wonderful and fairly remarkable that all of those groups would come together. And I think it's one of the things that I'm really grateful for here in Boulder County. And the topic of the event was race in the criminal justice system. And we had a gentleman from an organization called Prosecutor Impact. He's a fierce advocate for criminal justice reform, a former prosecutor himself. He came and did a presentation. We had about 350 people in the community attend, and this was back towards the end of 2018. We had also been looking to partner with an organization that would help us with a deep dive data analysis to identify where racial inequities exist in the justice system here in Boulder County by going through case data. It's an extremely intensive project, so it took us a while to find an organization, but I'm pleased to share with you that we were selected by the Vera Institute of Justice to be one of their 3 locations in the nation where they would come and they do it at no cost to the district attorney's office. And they're in the process of currently going through all of our data from 2013 through 2019. They started last year. They've been going through all the data. The pandemic slowed it down a bit because they're supposed to be doing site visits and they haven't been able to do any of those. So I just met with them again virtually last week for an update on the data. And I'm really excited because we're going to make progress to the data. It's going to show us where racial inequities exist in the justice system in Boulder County. Because again, you could say it exists, you could talk about it anecdotally, but you really need the data to drive action. So as much as we focused on it with trainings here in the DA's office as well, I'm excited for us to make progress on the data front. We also would like to, and I'm committed to developing a data dashboard. You may have seen these in other parts of the country. I don't think there's an office in Colorado that has it yet, but a data dashboard that you can go on it on any given day and look at number of people arrested, number of people who received bond, charges, sentences, and so on. And it's just a daily data dashboard that's available through the district attorney's office. That's the kind of data-driven analysis we want to have and the transparency we seek to have here in Boulder County. The legislature is going to be considering a bill that requires data collection. I'm in favor of data collection, certainly. Be my hope that the sponsors of the bill would include the funding necessary. I look at the Vera Institute of Justice, which is the premier organization for this kind of work, and they've been working with us for over a year now. And that's how long it takes to collect this data and report out on it. And to set up the kind of data dashboard we're talking about is a really heavy lift in terms of collecting data, categorizing it appropriately, and having the IT structure to make that possible. I think it'd be a mistake for the legislature to do it as an unfunded mandate. They could have state judicial responsible for it, but then of course it would carry an extremely large fiscal note, which is what happens with every piece of legislation where they estimate the financial impact of a bill. So I think it's going to be assigned to the DA's offices, and I'm really hopeful that it doesn't become an unfunded mandate because it'll be completely unworkable. and it'd be a good idea with no real help or support. So we'll see what happens with that legislation. But the Vera Institute of Justice report should be completed by the end of this year at the latest, and I've committed to making that public and sharing it with all of you once they're done.
That's just one of the common problems. There's 3 bills pending right now that have data collection aspects to them, and they all would become effective July 2021, which is impossible. Last year, Senate Bill 217 that required us to collect demographic information on contacts, it was effective immediately. Well, we spent 2 months trying to develop a program and buy the software and train all of our folks on how to do this. And we finally got something where they can do it on a cell phone now and send it in, but it costs like $143,000 and it took 2 months. It's not, you don't just write things on the Big Chief tablet and put it in the mailbox anymore. It doesn't work that way. So we need time and we need money in order to make this work.
Speaking of which, I just met with a vendor recently. We were talking about domestic violence cases because domestic violence, along with property crimes, have increased during the pandemic here in Boulder County and throughout most of the state of Colorado. And since domestic violence is a mandatory arrest offense, this particular company was offering, and it was pretty exceptional product that they had, where they would look at the Boulder County jail population on domestic violence offenses and track reoffenses, violation of protection orders, and so on. For that program, it's $150,000. And it would only be focused on domestic violence cases, which to me are a priority, and to law enforcement, of course, and treatment providers, it's a priority. We can't pay $150,000 just for a program that focuses only on domestic violence. So you can imagine the cost for programs that capture every type of offense. So that's why I focus on the financial support that's necessary for any legislation that's actually going to have meaning.
So we only have about 10 minutes left. Does our host want to facilitate if anybody wants to have a conversation or come on screen and ask us a question?
So people are able to unmute themselves. So anyone, if you need to unmute yourselves and ask a question, now is the time to do so. I believe you guys have covered everything that was in the chat. So we'll leave it open for questions now.
I have been using a volumizing shampoo. I think it's working for me. A lot of people comment about that.
I think you look great, Joe.
Thank you.
I will say tonight is the 1-year anniversary. And I know we all have these memories of the pandemic and how it first started to impact Colorado. But for me, I'm a NBA fan, a basketball fan, as are my kids. And a year ago tonight, I went home. Obviously, we knew the pandemic was coming. And my son said, "Hey, Papa, the NBA, the Professional Basketball Association, just suspended their season." And I remember stopping and almost being upset that he would say such a thing because I couldn't believe that would be possible. I'm like, "Wait, suspended the season?" He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Buddy, don't say that so quickly. I don't think you heard that right." And of course, he did hear it right. And I think a lot about the things that happened in the days and weeks that followed after that announcement. I'm really grateful that my family has been healthy, that the staff, we've had a number of people on staff who've battled the coronavirus, but everyone has survived it. And that throughout the year, we've been able to keep the court system grinding forward very slowly. And now trials have opened up again starting last week. We've had a few trials already go off without a hitch over the past week, with a lot more trials scheduled. There's a tremendous backlog, of course, but looking forward to the justice system starting to move forward again. And Sheriff, we have a question from Beth Kelly. Will the bond category determine eligibility in the alternative sensing facility? And also, when do you anticipate the alternative sensing facility opening?
So I think we are 3 to 4 years out from opening. It takes a year and a half, apparently, just to get through the city of Boulder site review and building permit process. The eligibility is determined by the judge. It's a alternative sentence facility. It's not a pre-sentence facility. So people will go there as part of the minimus that the judge issues, depending on where they land and how the judge wants to handle that case. People who are working in the community and returning at night, people that are coming in for day reporting and doing their drug test and that kind of thing, verifying employment. People that are on home detention will be monitored from that facility. Our work program, the inmates that they're actually still inmate status, but they go out in the community and they work every day for local governments and nonprofits. They'll be housed in that facility. So that'll be part of this sentence, if that answers the question.
And Joe, we have a question from Sharon asking if we could speak about the recent riot. So the incident in the Hill area. Do you want to tackle this first, and then I'll share my thoughts on it?
Yeah, I can speak peripherally about it. Our role was just to support the city. It's a City of Boulder, City Police, and University of Colorado issue. The Sheriff's Office, of course, has resources to help during the event. And of course, we're hosting these young men and women as they get arrested at our jail. Most are being booked and released. I lived through and worked through and was in charge of the riots in '96 and '97 when we did the big crackdown on underage drinking on the Hill. Seeing the same sort of dynamics, youth, alcohol, frustration, pent up kids, and just cutting loose and being stupid. Unfortunately, I think some of these kids will likely lose their membership at the University of Colorado and be charged with some crimes, and that's an unfortunate result, but it's probably needed at this time to get things under control.
Right. I would add, I found it to be really unfortunate and outrageous conduct. I recognize that people are cooped up, and it's been an especially difficult year for all of us, especially for people who are going through college, which, I imagine if I were going through college right now, I'd want to be free to do the things I did back when I was in college and have memorable experiences that they're not having. But the health and well-being of the community, to me, takes priority during this pandemic. They certainly disregarded that with the party, and then it became far worse and far more than a party, with the flipping over of cars, damaging people's property, and then throwing bottles and rocks at first responders. It could have been so much worse in terms of what happened. And all the facts aren't in yet, but by all accounts, it seems like Boulder Police Department acted with great restraint. And it's been interesting to me to watch some criticism of that restraint in social media and in the media, when, on the other hand, as you know, since you're all practicing attorneys, if Boulder Police Department had taken some physical action against one of the or more of the individuals who are engaging in that violent conduct, that would have been front page news for weeks and months. And I think the fact that they exercise restraint is a testament to the police chief and to the outstanding women and men of the Boulder Police Department. So they did not make any arrests that night. That was a tactical decision on their part. And I recognize that there were people in the community who thought that was a mistake. But I think, as Sharon points out, it's like trying to arrest people in a bull ring. I think that's probably a good description, Sharon, if they had gone in charging into that crowd. So instead, what they've been doing, with help from other law enforcement agencies and the district attorney's office, reviewing the hundreds and hundreds of tips that are coming in, the video that's coming in. You may have read in the Daily Camera, I think it was yesterday or today. My days are off a little bit because things have been particularly busy, but a gentleman surrendered himself earlier this week. His defense attorney reached out to me on Monday to say that she had a client who recognized that he needed to take responsibility immediately and wanted to turn himself in. And I think that's the absolute right thing to do. I had stressed at the press conference on Sunday that, as you know, we look at it as a significant mitigating factor when someone accepts responsibility and is willing to surrender, as opposed to the police having to go through all the tips and all the all the many video recordings, not only from the body-worn cameras, but many videos are being sent to the Boulder PD. And as a result of those investigative steps, more arrests will be made in the days and weeks ahead. That is definitely going to happen. So those are my thoughts on the riot. Extremely unfortunate. We'll get through it. We'll move through it and do what we need to do as a justice system to address their behavior. We'll definitely do that. But certainly unfortunate and outrageous conduct. Any other questions? I know we're nearing the 5 o'clock cutoff time, but Sheriff Pelle and I, not to speak for you, Joe, but we really appreciate the invitation to meet with you today and the opportunity to connect with you and answer any questions you have. So before we sign off, are there any final questions?
We've stumped the panel.
You know, I look around at some of the folks that I'm familiar with who are with us today, and I'm not sure they're ever stumped, but I appreciate that they don't have any additional questions. And I just hope, we hope all of you and your families are doing okay, and that we're all seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with this pandemic. We're definitely making progress, and we're almost there, but I know it can't happen soon enough. So just wish you all the best. I know that everyone's doing their very best to get through this difficult time and trying to serve those that you serve while also taking care of yourselves and your family. So Amy Kubo says, well done. Thanks, Joe and Michael. And Amy, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all for being here today. And if you need anything, Sheriff Pelle and I are always easily accessible. We're committed to it. So always feel free to reach out if anything else comes up. And our sincere thanks to the Bar Association for bringing us together today and inviting us to be a part of this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll be sending out the CLE form shortly. And again, thank you for joining us, and stay safe this weekend. Have a good night.